It's the plug-in. It's the plug-in. I got 7 cans from my office. Back up. Good morning.
Good morning.
It's good to see everyone this morning on this first day of the week. Let me make sure we're good to go online. We are. I think everybody can hear me. All right, why isn't it doing anything? Here we go. All right. Yes. All right, we're going to continue our story. We're going to be in Genesis chapter 8 this morning. Genesis chapter 8, dealing with after the flood. Lesson 44 is where we're at. And going to this, we'll go ahead and jump into our questions real quick before we get into our class. Daniel, we'll come out of Daniel 6. The lion's den. When Daniel was thrown into the den of lions, what did King Darius say about Daniel's God? Daniel 6:16. That God, what was that? Save him, basically. Exactly right. She'll take care of, protect him, save him. That's exactly right. And Darius is really amazing to watch him say those things and see that. But we know how much he cared for Darius, and for Daniel, and he actually even started truly looking to Daniel's God. Next one, King Darius said, God is A, is living, B is dead, or C never existed. Daniel 6:26, A is living. Exactly right. Next one, Genesis 4, Cain kills Abel. Why did Cain become angry?
Because God didn't respect his offering.
Because God didn't respect his offering, made him mad. Exactly right. Next one, Genesis 5, Adam's descendants. Describe Enoch's relationship with God. We all should know that. We've done a lot about Enoch. He walked with God. Exactly right. What miraculous event occurred to Enoch at the end of his life on earth? God took him and he was no more. Exactly right. So he never died. We know that God took him before his death. Which brings to Genesis 5:27. Everyone should know this one. The oldest man we know about lived to be 969 years old. All right. Who was he? Methuselah. Yep. I don't even know if I want to live 120 years on this earth. I mean, that's a long time to be there. All right, let's go to the next one. Noah built the ark, Genesis 6. Even though God said he would destroy man and animals on the earth, who found favor in his eyes? Noah. Remember what? I've had some say before, Noah and his family. No, it wasn't his family. It was just Noah, is what the Bible tells us. And Noah saved him through the ark of God. Next one. Who could God keep safe in the ark? Genesis 6:18 through 20.
Noah, his sons, and his wife, his sons, and his sons' wife.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, really, we ask this question, who could God keep safe in the ark? Well, we know everything. Everybody that was in the ark was saved. Everybody completely. And that was such a great thing to see that and to come from that. All right, the last one. How many clean animals did God tell Noah to take on the ark? I heard 14. Is that right? Exactly. Yes, you had 7 pairs. Exactly right. 7 pairs. And there was the difference. Now, when they went on, because everyone says, well, the Bible says 2 by 2. They did. It went on 2 by 2, without a doubt. But it brings us to the next place. How about the unclean? How many were there? 2. There was just 1 pair. We see of the unclean. How long did it rain while Noah and his family were in the ark?
40 days and 40 nights.
40 days and 40 nights. Exactly right. Just non-stop rain. All right, so here we are after the flood, Genesis chapter 8. As we look at here, it marks basically a pivotal moment in history, a pivotal moment in the Bible, in the story of Noah and the flood, representing at this point God's faithfulness that we see in him and his covenant with humanity and creation. After the flood, waters subside, Noah and his family and the animals are given a brand new beginning. Everything's new all over again. And we know when we look at this chapter, you kind of break it down into several key themes. But the main thing is we see God's mercy, judgment, and promises that are being kept. And we see that knowing them just weren't left, when they were on the ark, it's like, what's going to happen next? God completely took care of them. So we begin with verse 1. Verse 1 is going to talk about God remembered Noah. In chapter 8, verse 1. If someone go and read that for us, please.
Then God remembered Noah, and every living thing, and all the animals that were with him in the ark. And God made the wind to pass over the earth, and the waters subsided.
Thank you. So first part here we see is that, it says, then God remembered Noah. In this statement, it isn't, of course, this isn't to suggest, as some might, that God had forgotten about Noah and his family. He never did that, but rather reflects God's timely action in fulfilling his promise, just like he said he would remember them. And it conveys God's faithfulness and deliberate decision to act basically on behalf of Noah, the animals, and the ark. And in the Bible, it's interesting, the term remember, when you hear it used from God, it's often used with God about delivering or blessing his people. We see it with Abraham. We find this with Abraham in Genesis 19:29. And who do you think is another one God said he remembered? And he brought them out. It was the Israelites in Egypt, exactly right, during the Exodus. We see that in Exodus 2:24. And it's a reminder that no matter the length or the severity of the trials that we're going through, God does not forget his covenant promise of his people. Even when it feels like, everything around us basically is in chaos, what we learn real quickly is that God is actively involved in sustaining and basically bringing about his plan. And God's going to do whatever he has to bring about his plan. And we see that throughout history and throughout time. Dad, you have a comment?
Yeah, going along with that theme, you look at the Israelites when they were in captivity, and their prayer constantly was, raised up, and God heard their cry. And all through the Bible, you hear that. And people, they didn't think about God's going to have a silver lining there. You may not recognize it right away, but somewhere, somehow, there's going to be something in that event that's going to help you to move forward as long as you rely on God.
Exactly. And that's what we see with this. That's what we see with everybody. You're right. Throughout the history of the Bible. And we'll see that today even with us as we go through this. So all this God remembered him, and it was really important to realize that he wouldn't forget them. I mean, imagine those 40 days and 40 nights. I want you to think about how rough those seas must have been. If you've ever been at sea before, and you've been on either in the military or on a cruise, you've ever hit a storm, you know what it's like. I mean, I know military has a lot more sea, it's coming up and down and things, and it's just, and they went through it, and you think through the whole time, usually people are scared to death. Now, it doesn't tell us what went on in the ark, with Noah and his family and everything. I went down at the times they were like, it was just crazy and bad. But God wanted to show that he would take care of them through it. He protected them. That's why it's so important to see this first verse, that God remembered them. And he didn't just remember who they were, he remembered everything they've gone through and everything that actually Noah actually did for God. And we see that happening. Dad, go ahead.
Again, we don't know what Noah did, but we know he was so faithful that for 100 years or so he built this ark, not knowing what was going to happen. Then, in this ark, as you say, this storm, 150 days. That is a long time to be cooped up. I know, we've been there. But I don't doubt it, but that he didn't pray to God almost on a daily basis.
Oh, yeah.
And God heard it, and God recognized his faithfulness even then.
Yep, definitely. And that's important to know that, we don't see anything that would have changed with Noah being righteous, the whole time. He continued that. And we can see that after as we get to the end of the chapter. So with all this happening, this next thing we see is that it says that God made a wind to pass over the earth. The word wind in the Hebrew could be translated basically couple ways. Wind that we understand, the wind blowing. And what is another way we see it being translated as? It mentions a person. We would say, I say a person, I mean a he. That'd be the Spirit. The Spirit, we know, our breath. When the Spirit hovered over the earth in the creation and all that. And I don't think I'm saying that's what this is. Some try to say it can mean either way. And usually you figure that out by the context. And we know when we read this, continue to read, God was using the wind to move the water, to move it away, and move it in different directions. And we see that. So Genesis 1:2, when we have this coming about, is that the water is going to have to, calm down, it'll have to subside, and we're going to see that happening here in these next few verses here, in verses 2 through 5. So let's go ahead and read in where the water begins to recede. I mean, think about it. They've been on this rough water all this time, and finally, once it starts to recede, it's going to be calmer, because it's not going to be like it's going down a drain, like that, and be gone. and it'd be really tough because there'd be whirlpools everywhere. I mean, it'd be really tough. But we know it's just going to slowly, gradually go back to where it was. We would see inside making new lakes, more than likely, new seas, all new areas. As we see as the whole landscape, I'm sure, changed in just massive ways of what we find, which brings us to these verses. Let's go and see what it says. Verses 2 through 5, please.
The fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven were also stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained, and the waters receded continually from the earth. At the end of the 150 days, the water decreased. Then the ark rested in the 7th month, the 17th day of the month, on the mountain of Ararat, and the waters decreased continually until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the first day of the month, the tops of the mountains were seen.
Thank you. Perfect, right there. All right, so as we see this these verses 2 through 5, we understand when this comes about that as we see this happening, let me see, where am I going back to? Let me go back here just a second. All right, as we see this happening, notice the waters didn't go down right away. I mean, it took some time, and it says they continually receded. So, it wasn't like, woohoo, it's over, let's get out. I mean, that's not how this was. Anything with it, So the rain that fell for those 40 days and nights stopped, and gradually waters began to recede, as we see over the 150-day period. But it doesn't just last 150 days; it goes on for a little while, because we see all the way to that 10th month. So the fountains of the deep and the windows, were closed, and rain ceased. And what I mean by rain ceased, it wasn't going to flood the way God had it done now. From this time on, would it rain? Oh yeah, without a doubt, it would rain from here on out. We would see rainings, and it would be different times of the year, just like us, depending on what storms came up and so on. But as we look at this here, we need to realize that it talked about that the ark came to rest on Mount Ararat. And when we see this here, the mountains, actually what it says, the mountains of Ararat. You see on the map here, you have, of course, Turkey here. We see Turkey, Cyprus for Greece. You have Syria, Iraq, Iran, Asia. This is today. You have Georgia, which used to be Russia, USSR over there. And you have Mount Ararat. So you have that section right here. When you look at Mount Ararat, they have what they call Mount Ararat, and then I think it's either called Small Ararat or Minor Ararat. I can't remember. I think it's small. And then you have just these mountains around there. So as we see this final resting place coming about, this symbolizes basically the stability and firm foundation that no one would find. The ark would rest and be stopped. It wouldn't go nowhere. It would sit there and be there to where they could deal with those things. In fact, even today, now don't think I'm saying this is actually what this is. People for years have tried to find the ark. They've tried to do everything they can. At Mount Ararat, there is this. There is this at Mount Ararat. It's down actually off the mountain. They believe it looks like if it was a ship that it slid down, whatever was to the bottom. I'm not saying it is for sure. It does match some really interesting, moments when you look to it. You see, you have the rear here, the front. You have these rib timbers, is what they're called, that they're petrified. And from here to here is the exact biblical length of the ark. And so that's what people try to say. Here's where it would have rested. Oh, it's called the Lesser Ararat. I couldn't remember it. So you have Mount Ararat, the Lesser Ararat. You have these mountains. Most searchers focus on this area over here, dealing with basically the ark to scale, that it slid to here. Others say that it was the anomaly is right here in this area, that it slid down to this way. And when you look at this, it looks a little different in this picture, of course, because there's no snow at that time. But it is up there. We don't know if it's there or not. I've always wondered, did they disassemble it? Did they use it for wood, for houses, for different buildings and so on? I mean, to me, that would make perfect sense, Easier to do that than chop down a tree and start all over again. But we don't know. I'm just saying, God did not tell us. And it's always been a man. And because the reason is, I've heard people like say, well, I believe in God and the flood if we find the ark. Well, good luck. I mean, so you got to have the faith in what is there. So as we look at this here, all this is happening. God's talking in those verses 2 through 5. And he says the mountains become visible. Now remember, the mountains it just look like peaks coming out of the water, because they're just water. So you see these little peaks coming out, starting in different areas. And, snow, we don't know what time of year it was. I mean, we know it's going to snow now, without a doubt, too. That's going to take place in the seasons. And no longer in that vapor, we would say that greenhouse effect of the earth. And, we don't know what it was. We know it must not have been too bad because they got out later, and went ahead and gave an offering to God and so on, but we just don't know all that. But here it marks the beginning of the earth restoration. I want you to imagine when Noah and them looked out first, and all they saw was what?
Land.
Water. No, I mean, when they looked out first, when it was, you know, it was just water. And then when it receded, even when it says they came to rest on Mount Ararat, you know, there was still probably water everywhere. Then they could look out, I'm sure you look way out and start seeing these little mountains popping up, you know, and that's what we see throughout. And you know, and imagine each day you can look out there and what are you going to see more of? More of the mountains, because it's starting to recede. That water's going down, down, down. And I want you to think about what that must have done for them, and just the excitement of knowing that God, you know, kept this promise of what He said He would do, which now brings us, of course, to Noah's going to send out a raven and then a dove, and he's going to send them out to try to find out about the land. Now, someone will say, wait a minute, they're on a mountain. The mountain peaks are already coming about. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with vegetation. It has to do with being able to survive. And because, you know, a bird, they're not going to survive. It's just mound of, you know, dirt, and that's it, rocks and so on. So that's what they're looking for here. So let's go and read this, Genesis 8, 6 through 12. And I know we all know the story about what the dove brings back, and that's where we finally get to the point of, yes, it's receding even farther. And not just receding farther, everything's starting to dry out. Because I don't know how many of you have ever been somewhere where you've seen something flood, and it's been flooded for weeks and weeks and weeks, sometimes months maybe, and you know, maybe a couple months, and then it dries out. And most of the wood that's under there, I mean, it's saturated. You know, the trees or anything that was there, bushes, some of them even died. They just completely died. So this is something to do with where God is bringing these things back, and that vegetation will come back, and what we read here. So someone go and read for us verses 6 through 12, please.
So it came to pass at the end of 40 days that Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made. Then he sent out a raven which kept going to and fro until the waters had dried up from the earth. He also sent out from himself a dove to see if the waters had receded from the face of the ground. But the dove found no resting place for the sole of her feet or foot, and she returned into the ark to him, for the waters were on the face of the whole earth. So he put out his hand and took her and drew her into the ark to himself. And he waited yet another 7 days, and again he sent out the dove from the ark. Then the dove came to him in the evening, and behold, a freshly plucked olive leaf was in her mouth. And Noah knew that the waters had receded from the earth. So he waited yet another 7 days, and sent out the dove, which did not return again to him anymore.
Thank you. So as we look at this, we go back and we observe this first part of Noah sending out. That Noah, it says basically goes back to, I want you to see this about the window. Oops, yeah, there we go. Where it talks here about, it states here, it came to pass at the end of 40 days that Noah opened the window of the ark which he made. This is not the windows that were above. We need to get this. When you read this in the Hebrew and then back to the Greek, it's translated as a window that he opened, that he cut open, that he basically opened up a new window that is there that he would look out, which would make sense because we would say, why not look out the other window? Well, think about it. That was really for light and ventilation. It was way up there, and we don't know exactly how it sat from the thing. It may have been difficult to see out. You probably see out this way, but you couldn't probably see down below where you were. So Noah does this window. It makes it very easy because we know that the birds will leave and the dove will come back and forth as we see with this window. Very important to understand. But the raven's flight, we begin with the raven's flight. The thing about ravens, they'll just fly and fly and fly and fly. You know, they'll do whatever and figure out. In fact, what are ravens? What kind of bird are they? Things that eat the good things, or what are they? What kind of bird are they? It's what I would call a scavenger. Like a scavenger. I heard somebody else say something else.
Vulture.
A vulture. But, you know, we see this, we know the raven, that scavenger they are, you know, eating whatever, really what they can find. And so Noah sends it out to check up the dry land. It doesn't return, and likely because it was able to find something. It went for a long distance, maybe sitting on, they would even sit on floating debris, the way they talk about ravens. But then you get to the dove in verses 8 through 9. Noah sends the dove out. And the dove goes out, and the Bible tells us it couldn't find a resting place. No resting place at all. And what resting place, that means doves, you know, it probably wasn't looking for the ground to land on because it could have done that right below the ark. It's looking for what? Trees. I mean, it's looking for a tree, and that's very common. That's what we see and understand. So this basically tells us, that the earth was still in a state of chaos and desolation. And we look at this and we go, well, why didn't no one just get out anyways? I mean, just get out and walk around. At least there's got to be. It's dry around, and now it's starting to dry out. Because they don't know what's out there. They don't know that there's going to be people or anything like that. But you don't know what the ground's going to do, what the water's going to do. And very importantly, God has not done what yet? He hasn't opened the door, hasn't told them to leave. I mean, he hasn't told them to go ahead and leave the ark. So here's where we see, I want you to think. I know the way I am. I'm an explorer. I would have, to get out of there, get a rope, go down the side of the ark and start checking things out. Here's the difference. They may want to do that, but they knew to listen to God again. They knew where their protection was, and they were going to stay with God. So we get to verses 10 through 11 that we read there. And let me see, go back to that. Verses 10 and 11, where the dove with the olive leaf will come out. And, after waiting another 7 days, Noah sends, of course, the dove out again. And it returns with an olive leaf. And, an olive leaf signifies, of course, number one, first of all, the waters have receded for plant life to be flourishing again. And a sign of peace and restoration. That's the way people look at it now. You talk about, offering an olive branch. We see that. That's like your handout. A suggestion of that peace that comes with it, a symbol of that. In fact, Psalm 52, verses 8 through 9, talks about this, dealing with the flood, as we see here. If someone go ahead and read that for us about the olive tree.
But I am like an olive tree, flourishing in the house of God. I trust in God's unfailing love forever and ever. For what you have done, I will always praise you in the presence of your faithful people. And I will hope in your name, for your name is good.
Thank you. So here we see, is basically that olive tree, that peace, that flourishing, basically saying God's taking care of it. God's doing those things. In fact, and I think Isaiah 11, verses 6 through 9 is even more a passage that paints a beautiful picture of peace and restoration in God's kingdom. And we're going to read this. I don't know how many remember these verses, or if you've ever actually even remember them reading again about a child, playing a baby with a cobra, and a child putting their hand in the viper's hole. You're like, what in the world? But let's go and see what it says as it talks about that there. Isaiah 11, 6 through 9. And things laying together you would never expect to happen, next to each other, resting in peace. And this is what God is talking about. And this Isaiah 11 has to do with what they would find after the flood. And we see that about it. So I'm going to read that for us, please, 6 through 9.
The wolf also shall dwell with the lamb. The leopard shall lie down with the young goat, the calf and the young lamb, and the fatling together. And a little child shall lead them. The cow and the bear shall graze. Their young ones shall lie down together. And the lion shall eat straw like the ox. The nursing child shall play by the cobra's hole. And the weaned child shall put his hand in the viper's den. They shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountains. For the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea.
Thank you. So here we see, this imagery ties back to the restoration of the creation after the flood. Not that God recreated the earth, but everything was coming back alive. It was coming back. And the world, had been ravaged by sin, but was now on a path of healing and wholeness. How many here, we read these here, would ever expect these things to happen? It's not like, no way. That one would have ate the other, and then that one would have been struck by a viper, with no doubt. And we see that, but this is what God was talking about. Full restoration, full peace that was there, and it was thorough. It's not just saving individuals like Noah and his family, but restoring all of creation in the way God had intended for it to be. And it's really remarkable when you start getting into chapter 8, some of the other things we find that go all the way back to Adam dealing with thorns and thistles. I'll show you in a moment. And the curse on the ground that he talked about. Remember there where he mentions it here that it would no longer be. And he wouldn't do that again. And it's really interesting to look at Isaiah 55, which we'll get there in a moment. But so all this is happening here, which brings us basically now to this point. Noah's going to leave the ark. Him and his family, verses 13 through 19. And someone go ahead and read that for us, please.
Bernie,
Yes.
all those animals were in the ark, right?
Yep. Every single one of them. Yep. So they would have been there. So, and that's why we see that. And you look at it two ways. Is that what he's talking about, them resting together because they slept together and so on? Well, they were all in one area, but he's talking about what it would look like outside that nobody would ever expect, you know, because they are coming outside. Once they go outside, think about it, they're all together, all these animals. You don't see fighting, you don't see anything going crazy, and like we would expect to see. And that's just God restoring that area between Him and man and humanity, and basically all living things and breathing. I'm talking even the trees, the bushes, the flowers, everything that we would think of. Dad, go ahead.
Yeah, you know, it's like sending out the dove. You try to catch a dove today. You can't do it very well. And here Noah's got one. He sends it out, comes back, nothing. Then it goes out, and how did this dove know to pick an olive leaf and bring it back to Noah?
Yep.
God had to intervene in that to give them a sign that, yeah, everything's okay.
Exactly.
And because the dove had no fear of Noah or the other family. In that 4 months that they were there, you don't know what was taking place.
Right.
And then to go out. So now you get to this next part, and it's interesting.
It is. I mean, it really is to see how it works out. And this is what I want you to see, as we just said, you know, throughout chapter 8, you see God's hand in everything going on. And that's the thing. This cannot be done accidentally. You know, this isn't just a happens that, you know, happen to happen. It's all on purpose in the way God's doing this to take care of it. Which brings us to this point, of course. Let's go ahead and read Genesis 8, 13 through 19 about Noah and his family and the animals, everybody leaving the ark. Someone read that, please.
And it came to pass in the 601st year, in the first month, the first day of the month, that the waters were dried up from the earth. And Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and indeed the surface of the ground was dry. And in the second month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dried. Then God spoke to Noah, saying, Go out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing of all flesh that is with you, birds and cattle and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, so that they may abound on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. So Noah went out, and his sons wives and his sons' wives with him.
That's kind of a tongue tire there.
Every animal, every creeping thing, every bird, and whatever creeps on the earth, according to their families, went out of the ark.
Thank you. And this is a remarkable event here, as we see all this happening, going forth. You know, Noah removed the ark, as you saw, removed the covering, and it doesn't mean he removed the entire thing, but he removed enough. I mean, he could actually, you know, get up there probably and look out, is what it was really getting at. And you know, and all, I mean, you imagine people like, yeah, how are you going to get those animals off the ark? Well, first of all, I'll just say this: if you have any animal that's been pinned in the house for a little while, and you open the door, what do they want to do? They want to go out. But here we go. That would be chaos when you're riding wood. It's interesting to see here at the end that it says they went out according to their families. And that would be, you know, they went out to 7, you know, pairs, went out all by pairs, and we see that. And it's just amazing once again, because this is something, you know, man can't do. You know, we said before, Noah wasn't this amazing zookeeper or something, you know, had all to do with God. God brought the animals there, God brought the animals on, and God's doing the same thing, bringing them on. Noah just is leading everybody, as we would see this happening, him and his family, and then the animals behind. So we see here in verse 13 that the earth begins to dry up. It says the waters were dried up from the earth, and this is a really remarkable moment. You know, Noah now is 601 years old, so he's 601 years old. Observed the flood waters had receded the earth. This occurred in the first month of Noah's 601st birthday, on the first day of the year. Now think about that. What a way to start a brand new year, you know? I mean, we always talk about, what do we call that? The January 1st, we call it something new a lot of times. New year, but we call it new beginnings, you know? We're beginning all over again. And it's remarkable to see how God is doing the same thing here. And it's also very important to understand here that it's very significant that the text gives those exact dates, the first day, the first month, because it marks the new beginning of the world. But just as God created the world in Genesis 1, He now brings about this new creation, you know, basically everything growing and looking great after this judgment. And the exactness of timing is important here, because in months, days, and years, it reinforces the idea that God is sovereign over time. And very important to get that God is aware of time. and what's going on and working with purpose and order. And the drying of the earth represents the end of the judgment. God's been able to let them start. But I just want us to get that and realize without a doubt that, God says He sees time different from we do. 1,000 years could be like one day, or one day be like 1,000 years. But here's God representing, saying, look, I know everything about the world. And I bet you think about this, all that time they're in that boat, some say, well, did they lose track of time? I'm sure they kept track of stuff just like we did, but here's the difference. Usually back then, how did they keep track of time? Because they didn't have a watch. They didn't have an alarm clock. They didn't have those things. How did they keep track of time? Use the sun. Where's the sun been for the last 40 days and 40 nights? It's been behind the clouds, and we see that. So you think about this. God is keeping them on track of what time, what's going on, what's taking place, and we see this. Now remember, Noah's not writing this part in Genesis. Who's writing this? Moses. And God, through inspired through the Holy Spirit, is telling him, what happened and what took place. And it should bring a lot of confidence to people to see how God is. Which brings us, of course, now to God's command. As we see here in verses 15, 17. Let me see, do I have? Nope. To exit the ark. God speaks directly to Noah, giving him instructions once again that it's time to do it. I'm glad Noah didn't jump the gun and try to do it on his own. A significant moment marking the end of their confinement in this ark. And the animals that have been preserved, that they could abound on earth and multiply. Notice, very important, he said they would abound on earth. In other words, that they would make a lot of, they would just go out there and flourish like crazy. And it's God's restoration plan. In fact, the command for the animals to be fruitful, multiply. Do we ever see that anywhere else before Genesis 8? Does God say that anywhere else?
What's that?
In the beginning of exactly. It's exactly what we see that this would do. It's echoing kind of the original command given to Adam and Eve in Genesis. Remember what God's saying in a sense. He cleansed the earth. It's starting all over again. It's a new beginning. Everything we find here. And despite the flood, God's plan of creation remains unchanged. Life is multiplying and will fill the earth again, as we would see with humans and animals, insects, flying birds, everything you can think about. And there's something else I think very interesting here. We're going to jump for just a second. Actually, I'll just read it. We'll get to it in a moment. But when you get to verse 21, because I want to say that before I say about Isaiah 55, 21 says, "And the Lord smelled the soothing aroma, then the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground for man's sake." Now remember, here when he said he would bring this, this flood, this big flood, he didn't call it cursing of the ground. Where do we hear the first time of the cursing of the ground? Where do we go all the way back to Cain, and we see it, and it goes back to, not to Adam, it goes back to Adam, where Adam and Eve sinned against God, and he didn't curse Adam, and he didn't curse Eve, but he said, basically her birth would multiply, and then he would curse the ground. And because he cursed the ground, what do we have we talk about? What do we have to deal with, he said? Thorns and thistles. Now what's interesting is before the flood, it seems like after the flood, those thorns and thistles aren't going to be as bad. Aren't going to be as what they were during the time of Adam, during that cursing of the ground. Because of what we read in Isaiah chapter 55. Isaiah 55 here we see is basically an instruction or a side, sits right beside a parallel of what took place during the flood and what was coming after. So I'm going to go and read it for us and I'll show you. Isaiah 55 verses 12 through 13.
For you shall go out with joy and be led out with peace. The mountains and the hills shall break forth into singing before you, and all the trees of the field shall clap their hands.
We'll stop right there. This is talking about everything receding, everything's coming out again, it's flourishing, and then go ahead and continue, Greg.
Instead of the thorns shall come up the cypress trees, and instead of the briars shall come up the maple trees, and it shall be the Lord for a name, and for an everlasting sign that shall not be cut off. Thank
you. So just as the flood brought destruction, also, paved the way of renewal and restoration of the earth. The passage from Isaiah speaks of a future restoration of the earth after the judgment. It's really interesting. Now, this doesn't mean that we're not going to have thorns and thistles, because we still have them, right? But something changed. Something changed of what it was going on with Adam of what we saw and what we find to where we see now with Noah. And we don't know if it was lessened or what it was, but it's interesting to read these chapters, to read these areas, that sit side by side with the flood. When you find this and what we read there, about God not cursing the ground, we usually think about that as the flood, but is there more to it, what we see there, which allows us to move on to verses 18 and 19. I see a hand up. Anybody go? All right. 18 and 19, we already read it, but we know that Noah and his family leave the ark. His wife and their sons and their sons' wives all step out of the ark, and the animals flow. The imagery here is, once again, just kind of like a rebirth. Coming out, starting over, and it's, no longer under destructive power. But also we need to realize about God's provision. God has provided the entire time during this time in the ark, provided for them. Do we think that provision is going to stop after the ark? No, not at all. God's going to continue providing. All Noah and his family have to do is what? Remain faithful to God. God's going to provide regardless. We know how providence God works, even for those who don't look to God. But to provide truly in the way God would want to, He would expect this from Noah and them and their faithfulness. And, so Noah sees that. He sees this restoration that comes with it, which now brings us back down to God's covenant with Noah, verses 20 through 22, the end of it here. And they're going to go out and they're going to do this great sacrifice. And this verse shows us real quick why these clean animals are so important. Because He's going to take up every clean animal, not just one or two animals, every single clean animal, and birds, as we see this happening. So let's go ahead and read this, 20 through 22, before we close out.
Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and took of every clean animal and out of every clean bird, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And the Lord smelled a soothing aroma. Then the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground for man's sake. Although the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth, nor will I again destroy every living thing as I have done. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, winter and summer, and day and night shall not cease.
Thank you. So we begin here, we go back to this with Noah's sacrifice. Noah built the altar to the Lord. He responds to doing this. In other words, Noah is worshiping God and, thanking God for everything. And we need to understand, remember, back before Moses, during the patriarchal time, it would be the head of the household who would be doing this. And that's why we see Noah, part of his demonstrating his gratitude for God's mercy, God's grace, God's, and he wants to honor Him, of course, the way he should be doing for saving him and his family. And this is what's interesting. God didn't have to tell Noah to do this. Noah understood. He realized this. Somewhere down the road, God had already said it. We go all back Cain and Abel, we talked about when we see that there. So with all this happening, God smells this soothing aroma. This word soothing could also be pleasing. It was pleasing to God. And because there are times throughout the Bible where people do the same thing and God didn't appreciate it. It wasn't pleasing Him. This aroma wasn't right. And the reason for that was why? Why do we see, what's that?
Their faith and heart.
Their faith and heart wasn't in the right spot. And they did it for the wrong reason. Exactly right. All that we see, or maybe the wrong way with what we have. So with all this, we know we have God's promises, for God speaks His promise after the flood. We're not to the rainbow yet. That'll be in chapter 9. Because everyone's like, where'd the rainbow go? I didn't see it. That's in chapter 9. But we see here that with all this happening, that they've established everything, made it right. And now we have a new creation, a restoration of the earth, which I want you to notice Romans 8. I want to read this before we close. Romans 8, 19 through 21. As you think about this highlighting the longing of the creation, the renewal, and the paralleling moment. This is another area of the Bible that parallels with the flood of Genesis, what is said in Genesis chapter 8. And it says these words, "For the earnest expectation of the creation eagerly awaits the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of Him who subjected it in hope. Because the creation itself it also will be delivered from the bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty," or we know that word meaning freedom, "of the children of God." And that's what we find with Noah. God restored their freedom, restored everything that needed to be done so they could live their lives. But in the process, don't forget about God. Don't get to where you are, where they were then. Brethren, we look at today, and we think, thankfully that not every person's thought and motives are evil and bad. But a lot of our world, a lot of it is, and we see that. But we just continue to live godly in the way that we should, And God will continue to keep us free, you know, in that sense that we can find freedom in Him and continue in all that He is. So that's what Noah and them found as they came out of the bondage of the ark in a sense. So any comments or questions before we close? We're out of time here. Nobody else? All right, we're good. All right, thank you for your time.